what is so frustrating in my business with helping people with their health issues and overcoming autoimmune issues, gut issues, what have you, I always look to inflammation, toxicity, and insulin resistance are pretty much the source of all disease. And when you look at a person's diet, number one, 67% of a child's diet right now is processed food. So it's not even real food, right? And then they go in and they get the processed food, little peanut butter and cracker snack, and it says it's protein filled. Well, that protein's not even going to be absorbed because it's killing your gut, and your gut can't even absorb the little nutrients that's in there. And then you've got gluten and other things in there that are disrupting everything else. So anyway, then you go to the other extreme where there's a whole bunch of studies that say that meat causes heart disease and be a vegan. And we can get into the environmental impact as well if we have time, but I want to focus more on the nutrition. And some of these studies that are saying meat causes heart disease is more of wasn't a well done study. These people could be eating McDonald's with the bun and the processed French fries with it and the canola oil that's all in there as well. So my point is, now can you tell us the nutritional value of wild animal meat? And anyone who's been following me, they're probably sick of me talking about eat your wild animal protein. I don't say eat your animal protein. I always say your wild animal protein. Why should we be focused on this wild, grass-fed, grass finished, not grain finished? There's a difference, everybody. Wild animal protein.
In the really short definition, going back to what you just touched on there in the beginning of what you're talking about, basically it's anti-inflammatory meat. 100% grass-fed animals that are finished on a vegetative diet that is native to what would grow on the landscape. Again, this is a good litmus test for people thinking about the way that as nature intended. If you were to walk out in a field or through the woods, what would be available to eat naturally without man having planted it there? There's not going to be corn and soybeans just growing along the path. It just doesn't exist. It might exist in very, very small quantities and rare instances. Obviously, it came from somewhere. But what is the corn and soybean? And I pick on those two because they're just the most prevalent and most well known. But the corn and soybean of today is very, very different than the corn and soybean of 200 years ago. So it's not even the same thing. But those are in their native form. They're complementary, but they're to an animal. But it's such a small percentage of their diet in the wild. It's almost negligible. But if you look at the diet that these animals are consuming, and what that does to their nutritional profile within their gut, which then feeds their body, it's a pH, a neutral pH versus an acidic environment, which acidity causes inflammation. So if the pH of the rumen within the animal that's consuming the diet creates the pH of the rumen, the pH of the rumen being acidic creates inflammation, which then creates inflammation in the animal, which we're consuming that animal that's inflamed. So naturally, it's going to cause inflammation you are what you eat. And there's a study that's coming out that actually just came out this April that hits the nail on the head. It was a scientist, Dr. Stefan van Vliet. He's a Dutch scientist that immigrated here about 15 years ago, and he's doing a lot of really, really high-end studies on human athletes and some of the best athletes in the world, taking some tissue samples, finding out what makes them tick, and then going and taking tissue samples of animals such as bison and finding out what makes them tick and if there's a correlation there. And what he's showing is that a resounding yes, there's absolutely a correlation between we are what we eat. And he said within 36 hours of you eating a certain food, I can take your blood and tell you that you ate that food. Or basically, you can draw your blood and tell you everything you ate in the last 36 hours. If what we're ingesting is coursing through our bloodstream, it absolutely has a significant impact on how we feel and just all facets of life, right? So it's very fundamentally, if you look at and think about this, food being from a nourishing standpoint and an anti-inflammatory standpoint, it absolutely matters. And there's real science that supports why one meat protein might be more predisposed to causing something like heart disease. And again, going back to what you said, if it's a McDonald's burger, it could have been 40% soy. That's a thing too. There's, just because it's protein doesn't mean it's animal protein either. So there's just a lot going on there. It's very muddied. Best thing that I can say is just eat wild protein, like you said, and you feel the difference. There's no doubt about it. For me, anyway, it makes a significant difference in the quality of life. Going into the veganism aspect, there's no scientific basis for anyone to say that they should be vegan because it's nutritionally superior.
No. The only
That can't be.
Yeah, the only thing that I feel vegans, they get a temporary benefit, not because of what they're eating, but because of what they're not eating anymore. Usually they're off the alcohol and off of the processed foods, and it's what they've taken out. But then all of a sudden they're anemic and they have brain fog and their hair's falling out and their thyroid is slowing down. A couple things I wanted to just touch on is that I mentioned inflammation, in insulin resistance, and toxicity. And you hit on the inflammation, but the toxicity, you're minimizing your toxic burden. We've got toxic burden, hitting our liver and our kidneys with the 5G and the radiation and the fluoride and bromide and chlorine and all of these things that are hitting us. And then, the spike protein, which I talk about the damage that that's done to all of our bodies and burdening our liver. So we need to minimize any other burden, and especially from the foods we eat. And that's why it's more important than ever to eat organic vegetables and be careful with what vegetables you're eating. And Sean, this was the story that I was going to save for you, or I actually have two. So I have two kids they're no longer kids anymore. They're in college. So they're out of my control. They're out of my house. My son went off to college and he got the minimum cafeteria plan because he knew that it was going to probably not be great compared to the food that I'm feeding him. He calls me day 2 and he says, "Mom, I can't eat this." And he said, "I feel like crap and it doesn't even taste good." And then so now he's got an amazing North Star Bison delivery, and he does these huge orders. I mean, they're probably one of your biggest orders because I can't believe the amount of food he eats, but it's so reasonably priced, and he loves cooking, and everyone in, all of his buddies are like, "Oh, what's he making over there?" And so now my daughter's off to college and she's going to be on that same plan as well. Thank goodness she's got a kitchen in her first dorm room. But this is the other story. So that's my young population little example. My mom is 80 years old. My parents have never had a weight issue in their life. And people that don't have weight issues tend to think that they can get away with eating anything, right? So she doesn't shy away from sugar and processed foods. Well, she just fell off a horse and she fractured her pelvis and she's not walking. And I said to her, I said, "Are you ready to do everything I tell you to do?" And she said, "Yes." And so she's taking all of my supplements. and she just got her first order from North Star Bison, and
Good.
she's super psyched. She loves the bison hot dogs, and she loves the already cooked roast, which is
Mm,
fantastic for anyone
sure.
who doesn't know how to cook. Those two things are fail proof. You can get them and they're fail proof. And she said, so it's been about 2 weeks since her fall. And she said, Sarah, it's really strange. Ever since my accident, my brain fog's gone away. I said, uh-huh. Because of the supplements, you got rid of the processed foods, got rid of the sugar, you're lowering your insulin resistance, you're lowering your toxicity, you're lowering not just the inflammation in your pelvis where the injury was, but in your brain. It's amazing. And your
Yeah.
body is in tune with it. And once it feels the nutrients from real food, it
Mhm.
responds. And I talk a lot about this, how this processed food is very addictive and gets your brain all wired in a wacky way. But once you start feeding it real nutrition, it says, please give me more. Um,
Mhm.
so I wanted to make sure we touched on that, because, and then the fact that you're talking about the corn and soybean feed for the conventionally raised beef and chicken and turkey, all of those animals, you are what you eat eats. And all of you out there thinking that you are doing a really good job in staying off of the gluten, and even maybe you're staying off of the corn because you heard corn has GMO. Well, what if that corn is in the meats that you're eating, right? And
Yeah.
soy is extremely estrogenic. So, are you a guy that's losing your testosterone? Are you having estrogen dominance? It might be becoming coming from the meats that you are eating, not necessarily you eating soybeans and being a vegetarian, but actually from the meats that you're eating and the inflammatory fats.